Thank you, Art, for doing this. I think this is a very timely subject.
I've got a lot to say, so I'm going to move quite smartly because I've been advised that I have to leave some time for questions. The topic is microgrids, and microgrids themselves, when you start looking at them, they've got all the capabilities of sustainability, reliability, independence. They're good investments. They can mitigate global warming and adaptation, etc. Part of all this is what I have started up, the Energy Freedom Project, and Ed Napke was very insistent that I call it Energy Freedom, and nobody goes against Ed. But it is directed at a fossil-free future, and I want to, first off, I'm not going to read this, you can read that, but the power grids are so vital to our survival. You take a look at what happens on farms within the city. Geez, the last time New York City had a power outage, there was rioting and looting and all sorts of things that went on. Lights or water, of course, runs through all of these. We take a look at what happens in our homes. Clearly water, and looking after the internal climate. One thing that we should all recognize is this 35 degrees C wet bulb. What that means is that is your body temperature. And if, in fact, the outside temperature is greater than 35 degrees C, you're going to die. Therefore, you need some form of air conditioning and some way to cool down. And that's because what's happening within your body, you get transmutations take place as well as chemical reactions. If anyone wants to ask me what a LNER transmutation is, I'd be happy to tell you during question period. And therefore, what we have to do, or I believe we have to do, not only individually, but as a society, is address this world of resilience, and with survival being the issue. Just talk to the residents of the Bahamas who have been confronted with this, as well as those in Florida and Texas. John? Well, a microgrid, it's interesting that I went off to Google Groups or off to Google search and I found a number of definitions, so I pieced together some of it. But ultimately, it is one or more individual power users and that get together, make a little network, and they're ultimately attached to some central supply, but they have the ability to function all by themselves. And this is called behind the meter. I'll be talking a bit about that. But this gives the people who have a microgrid, it gives them storm readiness and ability to have some resilience after a disaster. And of course, survival is in there. I found this as an interesting quote that by 2020, microgrids are going to, deprive the normal suppliers of $170 billion in business, and therefore, and these are just commercial companies that are doing it. It's not little guys like me, and of course, there's more and more microgrids which are one household rather than a whole field full of solar arrays and windmills, etc. And this, by the way, is why a lot of utilities resist change. This is their business model. They build the nuclear reactor. You sit back and turn your switch on and pay me that's my business model. And along come microgrids, and that's disrupting that, and they're not too happy about that. But there are things that are happening. Home microgrid sharing over the grid is certainly in the future, and I will present one slide on that right at the end. And as far as I'm concerned, or as far as you're concerned, I became a microgrid on the 4th of April of this year. I want to show you continental power grid, and it's divided into east and west, and Texas. Of course, Texas has to be unique. One of the things that, if you look right here in this corner, this is where the three grids come together. And to connect them together is a big deal. Stability of these networks individually is paramount. And by the way, we're connected on, the 100 miles north of the border. We're connected to the east and the west grids in North America. And anyway, to transmit energy from one grid to the other, you can't do it with AC. You must do it with a DC connection, and so that becomes a whole bunch of equipment and difficulties. The electricity grid. What I would like you to do is just to let your imagination swim a little bit and have you go and picture yourself sitting on the meter to your home, and pretend you're an electron and you're looking out to see what you can see, and there's a plethora of pathways and equipment that is out there, and it itself is really quite a web, and it's very similar to the internet, which it's so complex that people draw a cloud and say, I can't explain it any better than that. And that's very similar to the grid, and I'll show you some of the reasons why. One of the other things people don't recognize is there's also a well-developed communication network that runs over this. They've got a lot of equipment to control. They have to know when a car has knocked down one of their poles, and they know it before you phone in and report the outage. There's you got smart meters that are reporting. I mean, it's quite an advanced communication network. And right now, the grid is undergoing a fair amount of modernization because there's an ever-growing number of renewables coming online. And of course, we've got our electric vehicles as well as battery storage technologies. Interesting thing is very vulnerable to cyber attack, and of course there's a lot of concern going on because to take out a grid is almost equivalent to dropping a hydrogen bomb on the country. It's very critical. Behind the meter, turn around now and look into your house with your electron vision, and this is called behind the meter. And what's really going on there? Are there communications? Are those people communicating and understanding what's going on? And when I turn the bathroom light on, the answer is, yeah, they can figure that out. You know where your energy is going, at what time, why, for how long, and there's absolutely no detailed records kept. Few controls, you got some switches and thermostats, and it's a pretty passive thing. There's parasitic loads that are on all the time, and you probably don't know about half of them. But ultimately, what one can do is to make a profile, a 24-hour profile, and figure out what's going on. And when I do that, I can tell when the bathroom light gets turned on, and if Hydro One really wanted to know that, they can as well. There's two ways a household can participate in the grid. One is called net metering, and the other is microfit, and that's a flow-in tariff. That's what I'm connected to the grid with. I'm also connecting as a secondary connection through net metering. I get paid for this, but nobody pays me for that. It's like putting energy into the grid when I have excess to my requirements, and I can draw it out from my savings program when I need it when the sun goes down. We talk about transmission. Well, everybody knows what that looks like. But transmission is, in Ontario, they say there's 30,000 kilometers. But, boy, there's a bunch of equipment in there. Towers, switches, transformers. Well, you can read them all. There's all sorts, as well as what they call local distribution companies. And those are your typical Hydro One and Ottawa Hydro that are there. Yeah? Now, this is a very, very interesting chart, because I went off to see what they had on the net on it. And this is the Ontario Power Grid, which says, there you are, the fuel, nuclear, hydro, gas, bio, blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to talk more about the import-export at a separate slide. But this picture was a little slow in coming up, because what they were doing is calculating in real time how much nuclear energy was being supplied. This isn't the maximum. That just happened to be what was being supplied at that point in time when I said I want to know what's happening on my network. So, and you can see the mix here. Here are two gas and biofuel, which are providing the atmosphere with CO2. Therefore, if you use any electricity, you are, in fact, contributing to carbon loading of the atmosphere. Solar. Look how tiny that is. And that represents, quite frankly, because I did this about midday, that's about the maximum that was possible, unless there was a storm or lots of clouds somewhere. But it's a small amount, and wind is small. We also, by the way, do a lot of importing and exporting, but I got another slide on that. Yeah? Here's our generating stations, and they're spread around the province, and the wavy ones are clearly hydro, and the ones that look like a little propeller is probably wind generation, and the nuclear, etc. But you can see, and I like this one because it has where the major transmission lines are. Okay, these aren't rivers or roads; those are transmission lines, and I look out here, and you say, well, there's some dams and things there. They're obviously not generating a whole bunch because they don't even have a major transmission line going to them. But if you take a look here, coming down the Rideau, there's some small hydro projects as well. Sean? Busy graph, and I apologize, I don't expect you to read it. The only thing that the message here, the takeaway is that there's 78 low voltage local distribution companies. You know, here's Hydro One and Hydro Ottawa, and there's a whole bunch. And just think of what's necessary to coordinate all these. Also, the other takeaway is, look at some of these have their own little grids attached to them, and that's what these lines show. So they have their own transmission towers, lower voltage than the big guy. Next. Import exports. This is real interesting stuff. We export to all our neighbors, Manitoba, Michigan, etc., and we buy from them as well. And at that point in time when I did it, this capture, this is how many megawatts we were importing, and we were exporting that many, and in fact we are exporting more than we are taking in. Now take a look at the individual places. You know, we're export, but here with Quebec, we're importing and we're exporting. And you say, you can tell that's a magnetic. And you say, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Why would you do that? Well, it's because you write a contract. And you write a contract to export so many kilowatt hours. And if your demand changes and you still have to honor that contract at the same time that you're importing from Quebec. And I don't have all the contracts here, but they're all available on the net, and everything adds up and makes sense. Next. Now here's the people who control the grid, known as the Independent Electricity System Operator. Quite a mouthful. But the IESO, I remember seeing their control center back in around 84. It's when I was at NDC, and I was really impressed with them then. But look at it now; it just blows my mind. And I'm going to show you my little control center. So remember this when you see mine. Next, I'm going to give you one equation to remember. Supply equals demand. That is, it looks so simple, but I'm going to show you how complex this really is. Mathematicians put a little brackets around with T representing time, meaning that demand varies with time in some funny way, and supply varies with time in some funny way, and your job is to get them to match exactly every second of every day. Now, that is a very challenging thing to do, but it must be. And I'll show you some of the reasons why. Exact match. You got some capabilities to vary the frequency and the voltage, which will change the power flow on one side of the equation or the other. But I do want to make sure you understand that supply equals demand is not just for the IESO, but it's also for microgrid people, for me. I have to do this as well. Next. Give you a sense of how the demand can change. I grabbed this one time when I was down in Arizona, and, well, 2016, when I was in Arizona. And interestingly, these are consecutive days, different color. And you can see how the demand varies throughout the day. Bottoms around 5 a.m. and peaks sometime around 3 in the afternoon. But it's different every day. Yes, there's some general trends and what have you, but you, the supplier of power, you have to be able to have sufficient flexibility to meet this demand as it comes in. Next. Now this is the demand duck. Now just sort of focus your eyes a little bit. It looks like a duck. But let's just address what it really is. It's got this demand happening, and it's for the same day, 31st of March, for these years. Some of them are projected. And this is kind of an old picture of the duck, because they've only had actuals to 2013. But it's following this trend. And you say, what's happening here? Well, as the sun comes up, the solar people start producing their own. The demand on the energy supplier drops off. And as more and more solar is added each year, the belly of the duck dips a little bit lower. But as the sun sets, now, major issue. All of a sudden, there's a demand curve that is very, very steep. And so the grid supplier, he's got to scramble. He's got to find a way to provide all that energy that's coming online. And the term peaker, how do you meet the peak? And I'll use peaker again, but that's what these people are worried about. How do you do that? And there's many studies that are done that say, well, we will look not only at the supply side, but we'll look at the demand side and see if we can adjust the demand. And they do a lot of that by having time of day usage charges and what have you. And they try and work with the major consumers to try and smooth the duck out, try and get it, ideally was probably about 2013, but you still had a peak. Next. So I want to ask the always embarrassing question, what are you doing about climate breakdown? What is our generation's legacy, and is there anything we can do? Well, I've run into trouble with some people who like to leave it to the government to look after their survival because, well, they're too busy doing other things, and, well, it's expensive. Yes, I have money to recover after a disaster, but I have no money to prevent it. And, of course, I'm ill-equipped. I don't have the skills, therefore my government's going to do it for me. I keep thinking of those 8 people in the Florida nursing home who trusted their government, and they died of heat exhaustion. Not that they had a choice, but we have a choice. You can die of heat exhaustion if you wish. I have no intention of doing that. What can you do? You can learn. You can talk. You can take action, and most importantly, you can influence. You all come with rich networks. Use them. Develop a war plan. Anybody can do that. And it's target rich. We got Trump out there and his anti-science and anti-climate. Boy, it's hit at him at every opportunity. Of course, my war is against burning fossil fuels, using a microgrid and an electric vehicle. I also look at it as a very practical application of lifelong learning. Everything I've done in life seems like I've been in training to do exactly this. I've been acquiring skills along the line, and now I can apply them. Next. Just want to talk a little bit about greenhouse gas emissions. 50% of home energy use goes to internal climate control. That's heating and cooling. And one has to wrap their arms around that. I'll be talking quite a bit about that. And of course, 23% of Canadian greenhouse gases are produced through transportation. And of course, so electric vehicles are popular. I own an electric vehicle, and the cost of getting around is 10 to 20 times cheaper with an electric vehicle. And I recently read an article that said an electric vehicle has 20 moving parts compared to the internal combustion engine, which has 450 or thereabouts, and hence maintenance is quite a different cost item. Of course, what I'm interested in focusing in on is both home and transportation emissions through generating my own energy and efficiencies. The Energy Freedom Project. Well, I've told you it's a microgrid initiative, and it's, I don't know what I'm going to do with it all. I want a way to go off and explore and try and see how things work and come up with ways that I can advance my own personal energy efficiency and adaptation. I also want to find a way to change my energy habits, because we all have them. It's been around, and you just flip the switch, and perhaps there's other ways, and there's lots of ideas, by the way, on doing that. And everyone I've talked to keeps giving me more ideas, and if you got some, talk to me about them. I'll probably implement it if it's good. I'm going to put in, of course, redundant energy sources, and I'll show you that, as well as coming up with storage strategies. And with, an efficient demand reduction adaptation in mind, right? Supply equals demand, big issue. Storm ready, of course, and survival. We know that climate breakdown is happening, and it will intensify. We are not immune in Ottawa. Future design improvements, I have no idea where this is going to lead ultimately, and I expect that it'll never be over, because there's always going to be new innovation, and I'm curiosity driven, and I'm not strongly financially driven. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the subsystems. There's 11 of them identified, and I'm going to talk about 8 of them because they're of more general interest. Next, Sean. Mission. Well, I want to be, and you can read this, of course. I want to be totally open to everything that I do, such that anybody can come in and see how credible I am. And particularly with, what am I doing with my internal climate, my energy usage, where I produce it, how I do it, how I store it, and what I do with my transportation. Yes, my home becomes a lab, and I intend to make it very smart and energy efficient, and I will, in fact, as well, become an integral part of the Internet of Things. If you don't know what that is, don't ask me, because I don't think anybody really knows. But there's a lot of innovation coming, and I'm already plugged into a fair bit of that. And of course, one of the things that's vital is to have an energy usage profile, and because you got to have a before and an after picture to say how well you did. I mean, the major concern is, what do you do in a prolonged power outage? How do you function? How do you survive? And the only one that I've been through was the 89 ice storm, and we all know that there was a lot of problems, particularly amongst the farming community. It didn't affect people living in Ottawa as much as it did the people who were under Hydro 1 failure conditions. The other one which is really big and I like is by disconnecting from the energy infrastructure, both the gasoline prices and power prices. I don't care. They can go where they wish. You can have rationing. I'm immune to it. I've got my own energy island. I'm fine. And I keep saying, if you think that the climate is not going to degenerate here in Ottawa, causing heat wave flooding and other deterioration, I think you might want to reassess your assumptions, because that's coming. Many grid interruptions are going to happen. My own vision, finally fossil free. I mean, that's a wonderful vision. How close I'm going to get there, I don't know. Electrification, well, yeah, as much as I can, and ultimately I want to be 100% homegrown power. Parts, nothing fancy, just things I can buy. transportation. Notice how I said electric vehicles. Yeah, well, I've still got a gas guzzler, but trying to buy electric vehicles these days is tough. They advertise them, but they don't have them. And decarbonization, how close to zero? Yes. In the literature, microgrids are also known as distributed energy resource, a DER. I make sales to the grid, and ultimately I want to be an energy island, somewhat like Hawaii. Climate breakdown, well, we know that's happening. I've already talked about that. Benefits, comfortable, affordable living, improve personal cash flows. I'm a businessman too. I want to make some money out of this. And I'll talk a little bit about that, and let Kathleen Lynn and whoever is manipulating the energy infrastructure get on with it. I don't care. I'm independent. There's my EV, and I brought Peter Colossus in it, and the whole way he's saying, "Wow, I've never been in an electric car. Shut the window. I don't want to hear anything." and that's good. It's a little guy. 2014. I bought it in 2015, and do not regret it 1 second. It's a wonderful thing. And what am I going to do with it in a microgrid? Well, of course, I'm going to use digital technology to control the charging. And, well, of course, that means I want to charge the battery when the energy is free. Why do I want to pay Hydro One for anything? Also, this is an interesting concept that when I come home and I plug the car in, I want to be able to have the house use the energy that's in the vehicle rather than the other way around. I want to use the EV battery as storage for house use. And I'm going to put the whole thing under control of a Raspberry Pi. And I've brought one along, and I've asked Jean if he might want to pass it around. It's a little computer that has that thing has the same power as the laptop, and right now I have about 8 of those. So and I'll be putting them in charge of each one of the subsystems. Jean? Behind the meter. This is not really a very complex thought, but I want to make sure it's driven home. In my area, Hydro One is my utility provider, and they also own a meter, which they keep track of my usage and send me a monthly bill. But the wire that's connected there into my main circuit breaker is my wire. And I am behind the meter. And so what happens back here, by and large, Hydro One doesn't care as long as you're meeting provincial standards and not jeopardizing their grid. And therefore, anything I do has to pass the Ontario standards and be inspected for everything behind the meter. But Hydro One cannot complain about it as long as I meet the standard. Next. So, my first attempt at saying, okay, what's really happening here? And I said, I'll put together a little block diagram and put my 10 kilowatts under my microfit going through my export meter, which goes off to the grid. Then if I need any of that power, I have a second meter, which is counting my imports, and ultimately that feeds into the house. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a whacking great switch here, which says I can turn you off, and I don't have to bother with you as long as I have my generator, LNER generator. My own solar array is different from that one, feeding my battery, and my battery can switch to various loads and charge my vehicle, heat the hot water, and heat the space. And all this behind the meter. And next, please, Sean. And that was so complicated that I said I gotta do something simpler. And so I said, okay, how does energy flow here? And we got three sources: solar, generator, grid, coming through a switch and charging the battery. Nice and simple. I can throw these switches on and off, and I can charge the battery at any time. Then I have one relay number 4. It's got 2 poles on it. One is going to feed the right side of my circuit breaker panel. The other is going to feed the left side. And I can run then my entire house using this technique. What happens when things go wrong? Well, I got relay number 5. I open all these guys up, connect relay number 5, and that means the grid comes in and feeds the 2 loads, and I'm right back to where I am right now. So I can isolate the whole lot for maintenance and software upgrades, etc. The next. This is what the panel really looks like. There's the 6 solar generator grid, load 1, load 2, the battery in the middle. And I put some LED lights in, so there's no question here. Anybody can see at a glance that the solar panels are providing power into the battery, and the battery is connected to the load. And so when the computer's often doing that, I just look at it, and you know what's happening. And I can do this manually as well as under computer control. Next. The Tesla. I've got 2 14 kilowatt hour Powerwall batteries on order. They started installing these in June, but boy, they're hard to come by because Musk is often doing so many things with the big grid suppliers. Microgrids are not really high in his priority. He doesn't make near as much money out of the. One of the nice things about microgrids, or at least batteries, is they allow supply equal demand. They make it relatively easy because they're going to do that all by themselves. Nice thing about microgrids is it's called a black start capability. It means you can just walk in and throw a switch and away you go. The controller that comes with this battery is really quite interesting, and I'm just starting to actually wrap my arms around what it can and cannot do. And I've had some very interesting conversations with the Tesla designers, and every time I talk to them, I put the phone down and I'm saying, "Wow, was that ever fun? Really good." Okay, now state of charge is really something that's important, because a battery is sometimes a supply when it's discharging, and sometimes it's demand when it's being charged, and it's a major issue when that transition takes place. Next, we've got to move along. Here's what it looks like. It's about this high, this wide, and that deep. I'm getting 2 of them. They pack them up like a deck of cards. Next, let's just skip that. I've also put in some money to buy 2 Orison batteries. They're only 2 kilowatt hours each, but and one possible design is this funny looking tower, which they put LED lights and sound and anyway. I'm going to get the panel and I'll put a Pi in charge bit. Next, the Canadian generator. It is no fossil fuel required. It uses the hydrogen and water, And the supplier has since been offered $250 million to move from the Toronto area to Saudi Arabia and set up a factory there. He's gone. But I haven't given up hope on getting a 5 kilowatt unit for the project. And I'll put a pie in charge of it next. Ground source heat pump. This is real interesting because this is internal climate control and uses a VEC spiral loop ground coil. I met a guy who has had one in Canada and has run it for 25 years, has a coefficient performance of 4.1, and he does all his home heating, cooling, and hot water heating from it for the last 25 years. One of the things it does, it permits freezing the water in the ground to a block of ice like a great big cigar. But the other thing you can also do, you can heat it and make it warmer than normal. But there's room for lots of innovation in that. I'm looking at just by using modern technology, not stuff that was 25 years old, to use, number of sections in the ground coil, variable speed scroll compressor. Some of these compressors are wow, really innovative and modern capabilities, as well as putting variable speed pumps in for both pushing the refrigerant out through the ground coil as well as over the heat exchanger blowing warm and cool air into the structure. Yes, Raspberry Pi, going to run it again using the Modbus protocol. Next. Here's my solar configuration. This is my southwest and this is my southeast roof, and total capacity 9.8 kilowatts, and I'm going to show you some of the output from it next. Energy production, well, it's really nonlinear, it's intermittent and unpredictable, and I'm showing it in 15-minute time-lapse vertical bars. And so far I've produced, as of yesterday, 7.91 megawatt hours of power, which I've sold. Next. Here, on the 10th of September, you can see on the far left the sunrise, and as the sun rises, it peaks around 1 o'clock, and then it drops off. Not a cloud in the sky this day. Perfect day. Near perfect solar day. Next. Here's a less than perfect day. Lots of cloud, same scale, hardly anything. And is that predictable in some way? Not in my books. I don't know how to do that. Next. Here's an interesting production day that you can see how the clouds are going by. Then all of a sudden, Hydro One had an outage for a couple hours. And part of my contract says I will not produce power and dump it into the grid because I could cause some very serious health hazard to the guys working on the grid. And so it automatically shuts down. And you can see they came back online, and I got into production, but all the energy that's produced in here, gone, wasted. Next. This is another interesting one. Nice day, started off 21st of August, then all of a sudden it started to dip and reached bottom about, if you draw that across, maybe halfway, and then it carried on the rest of the day, of course. That was the solar eclipse, and in Ottawa, it was predicted we'd have a 51% blockage, and I verify that's probably close. Next. Here's all of May. Look at that. It's all over the map. Every day, 31 days. Each day is different. And when I say supply with the little t around it, nonlinear, intermittent, unreliable, that helps you understand what I mean. Next. However, if you do it year over year, look at this. This is a colleague of mine. He's had his solar for 4 years and a bit, and you can almost see a trend here. This looks rather nice. Look at January and February, just terrible, and things pick up in April. Next. Distribution and transmission, of course. The Hydro One, they don't have to generate and deliver. I'm doing it. They don't have power losses, I2R losses, and they're not, or at least the whole world is not susceptible to failures in their system. And just think of Florida and Mexico City earthquakes. Health benefits, of course, air pollution, and of course there's always people who say high voltage lines are not good for you. And of course, the environmental value means reducing the need for diesel or natural gas peakers. Next, and if you remember the peak from the duck. Home demand, well, we know that I don't know the details, but I'm sure there's going to be mealtime peaks, night minimums, and weather dependency, and I can time shift some demands around, and I can reduce some demands using area heating and a bunch of things. Again, Raspberry Pi is going to look after all that. Here's what the internet interface is going to be about. We'll start with your Android phone going through an access point, using an SSH tunnel through the internet, come out your home router and connect to your computing devices and controllers. Colleague of mine has this all up and going, and all I have to do is implement it. Next. Outcomes, I hope to reduce my cost of living, getting some independence, untethered. I got stability and control, increased resilience, war games, climate breakdown mitigation, survival. I'll have influence, lots of hard data. I'm looking forward to future collaborations with university governments, other people. I'm interested in talking to them all. We can do more R&D. I really want to identify best practices, and I don't know what those all are. And I'm going to have an Internet of Things, a smart home. Business, I have every intention of doing business, and of course, freedom. I have the power then to set my own pace. Next. Here's my control center in October 2016. I had to build a special desk, and I went to Salvation Army and got a stool for $2 and had to put a couple of 6 inches on it, make it higher, so that this is sort of like about this height, so I can stand at it as well as sit at it. Next, here's the control center just a few days ago, and you can see there's that same desk. There's 5 computers there. You'll probably recognize that one, and that one. You don't recognize that one, because that's a Raspberry Pi, and there's another Raspberry Pi on this board down here. This is my main high voltage panel, and I'll show you inside that. And this is just storage. Behind this door is my circuit breaker panel, so everything's there. Next, please, John. If I just move over a little bit, you start to see this big area. This is where the Tesla batteries are going to sit. I'm going to put an inverter over here in the wall, and you're starting to see my software development center with, again, a couple of monitors, a couple of computers there. There's a Raspberry Pi is there, and an Adreno 256 is there with patch panels, power supplies, and bits. So I do software development there. Next. Actually, that's a better shot, but it's also showing what's sitting beside it is where I do my soldering and where I build electrical things, and you can see tools and what have you that's there. Next. I just wanted to show you underneath the big monitor that I showed you, there's 5 boxes, and one of them I'm calling my relay complex, and this is an Adreno that is feeding lots of cables into this 16 relay bank, and that I can go off and use all sorts of things. I've only got 7 of them connected at this stage. Next. Here's what's going inside the other 3 of the other boxes. There's the meters I showed you that look all neat from the front, but look what's going on behind. Lots of cables and wiring, and there's a switch panel beside it. And this one is more a transient. There's lots of room. I'll be adding stuff in that guy yet. Next. Here's the high voltage contactors. The only thing I could get were 3-phase, 100 amp, 240 volt contactors. And so I'm just using 2 of the contactors. And I got a third one running free. But that was all wired up and what was making everything work. Next. Electra. These guys out of Toronto, they're the second largest utility provider in North America behind Los Angeles. And they've been doing studies looking at microgrids to replace critical infrastructure. They have ran a pilot with 20 homes, did a feasibility study with IESO, and they're saying, hey, we need to get 30,000 homes involved to defer investments in other grid infrastructure. And I'm just delighted with the CEO there. He's doing all sorts of things that says, hey, solar and storage and the intelligent software and controls can in fact address the duck peak. And his plan is to use the utility as a pipe where everybody feeds into it, and the utility provider gets compensation for it, as does the DER, the microgrid guys. And of course, if you got storage, it gives you an opportunity to time shift your sales to times when the prices are better. I want to see that brought in, and I'll be part of that. Next. This is the last slide. Okay. Summary, I talked about 8 subsystems, and you can read about them there. There's 3 I didn't talk about, and of course that's software development, Internet of Things, and of course how you mine the database to get all sorts of intelligence out of it. And here's a bunch of things that I'm thinking about, and just what I might do between now and when I finally get my batteries and questions.